E-cigarettes, vapes, electronic nicotine delivery systems. But there's a catch. They can only be unlocked by biometrics and your phone.
Like, are all the vapes going to be tracked? Is there a satellite that's turning these vapes on and off?
But now you have very specific individuals. And on this podcast, we've talked before about what impacts there might be in a privacy level, including with health insurance and other issues. So it really is a brave new world in which that's even being considered. It's certainly technologically feasible.
Do we want other people knowing exactly how frequently, where, when, how many times somebody is actually using their device?
When something tastes like candy, smells like mango, comes with like pretty packaging, people like psychologically code it as safer.
For teenagers, it's a potential lifelong habit.
We don't have 50 years, 100 years of data.
E-cigarettes, vapes, electronic nicotine delivery systems. But there's a catch. They can only be unlocked by biometrics and your phone. That's what the FDA has authorized when it comes to fruit-flavored vapes. And these have been in the news for quite a bit these last few months because we've seen the rise and the fall of electronic cigarettes as being a fairly decent alternative for people who are looking to try and quit smoking. But at the same time, there's a risk for early access of these devices and increased use in children. So the FDA recently authorized fruit-flavored. The FDA just authorized fruit-flavored vapes. And this is the first time this has happened, a lot going on in the market, but the catch is additional safety mechanisms that link your device with an app on your phone that's linked to a government issued ID. They could do spot checks intermittently to see if the person who the device is linked to is actually using it. And if not, it can be locked. So lots to unpack here. What do you guys think?
So the thing you mentioned about these cigarettes being linked to IDs, I'm assuming is about age, right? So to make sure that people under the age of 18 or 21 don't have access to these. But how many times do we know, or maybe have personally consumed alcohol under the age of 21? Like these things, I find it like a really interesting, like I realize kind of the idea behind the mechanism of using the ID to unlock the vape, which I think is, I'm a little intrigued on how that's going to be done on a national level. Like, are all the vapes going to be tracked? Is there a satellite that's turning these vapes on and off? But even, I actually, I'm not the tech genius on this call, but I am intrigued about how that gets delivered and how do you protect in the same way that we try to protect underage drinking? How does that actually work?
Brave new world that, like everything now, right? It's just as simple as Bluetooth and a connection, and it's also the data, right? So it's the individualized data instead of aggregate saying kids between 15 and 18 and this number might be in this case using vapes and fruit flavored or otherwise. But now you have very specific individuals, and on this podcast we've talked before about what impacts there might be in a privacy level, including with health insurance and other issues. So it really is a brave new world in which that's even being considered. It's certainly technologically feasible.
Do we want other people knowing exactly how frequently, where, when, how many times somebody is actually using their device when they're using it in the comfort of their own home? But the other part that I think a lot about is that this technology is being used as a way to help people move away from combustible tobacco, which we know even today is the leading cause of preventable death in the United States. When you think about its impact on cardiovascular disease, on cancer, so moving people away from combustible devices into other mechanisms does make sense. But if we're thinking about people who are over the age of 21, how many of those people who are still smoking are just not making the switch to e-cigarettes because they don't like the menthol flavor or the regular flavor, and they're just waiting for that fruit flavor to really come up? So who's that fruit flavor really directed towards? That's what I'm really suspicious about.
That's exactly it, right? Like you're a 55-year-old lifelong smoker who switches from combustible cigarettes to vaping is genuine harm reduction. And there is deep value in that. And we know that. But we know that, and medicine has actually learned this over and over, that when something tastes like candy, smells like mango, comes with like pretty packaging, people like psychologically code it as safer. And also, who are we always trying to prevent from eating too much candy? It's kids, right? Who gets attracted to adults? I was gonna say okay, and Shalon, but I, as an adult, have that same psychological response in Subway, right? I walk past a Subway and I smell that Subway. I want Subway because Subway smells incredible. It's a very like it's like a very normal reaction when I hope about the Subway, but it's a very normal reaction for people to smell like cinnamon rolls or bakery, like, and then be do and not having the self control to kind of go after it. I feel like as an adult, those things are more like things like baked goods or again Subway. I really like the smell of Subway, but for kids, things that smell like mango or a green apple, that's attractive to them.
Yeah, it totally is. You know what this brings to mind? I don't think you could find this on the shelves anymore, but candy cigarettes, and linked to big tobacco. I mean, big tobacco has well over a century of advertising tactics that have been chastised by Congress over and over, including in the 20th century. But candy cigarettes were a thing when I was growing up, and I don't think you can find those anymore. And it was felt that it would be kind of the enticing, like exactly as saying, Shruti. It's like the aromas, the sensations. How do they make you feel? That's what brings you in. And what's interesting, I mean, as compared to kind of the old days, I guess, if people were smoking at that 15 to 18 range, they'd be between classes, sneaking out of the lunchroom on the corner, pocket of at the end of the outside of the high school or middle school for that matter. And the version of this in the 21st century is these candy flavored, aromatous, very sweet smelling things that are very attractive. That's the same that could be for adults, but for the difference is for teenagers, it's a potential lifelong habit, right? And I think sometimes it's dismissed as saying, well, it's fruit, so it smells good, but also this general overarching idea or concept that or belief that maybe false is that it's harmless. The next generation of tobacco is vaping, doesn't harm us. It's not like the old cigarettes.
Absolutely. I think we don't have 50 years, 100 years of data long term on cancer risk, at least at minimum, for flavored vape exposure. And so, and we also know that the different flavors might have different effects on different organs, right? We don't know what's in those flavoring packets. And so, and I think, again, as oncologists, one thing that I think cancer teaches us is that carcinogenesis takes time, right? Those consequences of those exposures in their teens and 20s possibly take decades to show up. And so to not have that data and I at the same time I obviously recognize harm reduction, but Shalon, to your point, the harm reduction that we're hoping for is people who maybe picked up smoking in their 20s and 30s and now need to switch to vape, and those people are likely okay with that menthol taste or the non-mango. I also really like mango. That's why I keep saying mango flavored.
Mango. Yeah. And the
So
concept is the lesser of two harmful entities, each of which still has nicotine, and it makes us think of this era where we're concerned about ultra processed foods, which I know is completely separate, but you've got non-natural components that give the fruity flavor. I'm just going to speculate from a chemical standpoint, just completely speculative, that what does the nicotine do to those artificial chemicals that are in the vape to have that fruity flavor in the first place?
and that brings a really interesting part because when you look at the greater industry of e-cigarettes or vapes in the United States, most of the stuff that you can buy right now is completely unregulated. And we all know that kids are getting their hands on it. So right now, kids are getting their hands on unregulated devices, unregulated products, and we don't know what's in them. A few years ago, some people thought that it would be a really smart idea to add vitamin E into the cigarettes because why not? And we ended up with people developing significant lung injury, ending up in the ICU, and a few people even dying from side effects from there. And that's the risk of an unregulated industry. So the list of FDA authorized vape, I have that pulled up right now, is now up to 45 e-cigarettes that are authorized by the United States. So I'm thinking about the discussions that people have when we talk about the prohibition era and what the implications of the black market and the unregulated market could look like. And there are a lot of parallels between the conversations that we have retrospectively about that era and what we have right now when it comes to the e-cigarette space, where maybe it's better to have more FDA authorized devices so that our population as a whole is getting access to safer products.
Yeah, and there's a difference. I use the word authorized, and right, and it's another A word, approved. There is a difference, and it's important to recognize that. And it represents a difference in regulation, oversight, the depth of safety analysis, and so I think I think the researchers in this field will be looking at this for decades because of that long-term carcinogenesis that you mentioned, Ruthie, and then as you said with the authorization, Shalon, it's something that it's almost the dawn of the era where we're not going to know for many decades the implications, but what it harkens back to is that early era of big tobacco really reeling in their future customers at young ages, and it just seems like a cycle that this time around, instead of candy cigarettes or giving out free packs to teenagers, instead it's vaping with attraction with fruity flavors.
Yeah, I think to your point though, what you said about prohibition I think that there's got to be a limit though, right? I believe in obviously I believe in harm reduction, and I think that that's very important for people who have already been they're lifelong smokers or whatever that is. But I do think that there should be a limit. I feel that way even about alcohol, and I occasionally drink alcohol. Right there's got to be these substances cause a lot of problems for obviously personal problems for people, also cause a lot of health problems for the healthcare system, right? And I think thinking that there's kind of two trains of thought, right? It's like, do people accept personal responsibility for their decisions, or does the government regulate bad things that can harm you? And then if that's the case, that we're saying we should just allow people, at least it'll be regulated. Is that for everything? Is that for weed? Is that for cocaine? Is that for fentanyl? Like, I'm just saying that, like, if we're going to say that people can make their own decisions and at least it'll be regulated, that technically should apply for everything. All of us have seen, at least in residency, if not, later, people who have unfortunately passed due to complications from liver cirrhosis that was related to alcohol intake, right? And when you've seen that, you know how hard that is. But yet, obviously, like, alcohol is available everywhere, and I'm not saying that we should just take that all away, but I think it becomes really complicated when we think about what are the things we're regulating, what are the things we say no to, and why are we drawing the line somewhere?
Great points. Great point. And then remember, I think there's a lot of data that suggests that e-cigarettes and vapes are safer than conventional combustible, but that doesn't mean that they're completely safe and that there is no risk attached to them. There is basic science evidence showing that vaping can also cause DNA damage. It can also cause inflammation. It can cause a lot of the same changes at the cellular level, which can then lead to problems down the line. And we're talking about people being exposed to an untested chemical for which they may be exposed to for the next many decades. And what maybe there are new complications and new side effects and new associations that we don't know about, which are going to emerge when that happens. And that's one of the complications that I always think about. Like, are all the vapes and e-cigarettes the same? How does the concentration of different chemicals change? What about the additive flavors that they're adding on it? What kind of complication could those add? What's the difference between the different brands? It's a very murky space. We have to tread very carefully and really keep an eye. And the FDA is very clear on this, that these devices are not meant for kids. They're meant for adults who are looking to quit smoking, and this is an alternative specifically for them. And if they see that the marketing efforts and if they see that the uptake in kids is going to increase after these come up, they're going to pull the plug.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the perfect analogy, but I think of learner's permit, where you have to have some type of regulation, right? You can't just learn how to drive. You learn the logistics of how to operate the car, but you're not just let let loose to do it completely independently, but a step above where you have a trusted adult with a valid and an intact driver's license able to regulate. And it's a valid point where it's almost like having training wheels, but with some oversight. But that's difficult. There are ways around it. But it's really interesting at the intersection of cancer and health policy, and how do we, for especially those who are teens, be able to teach good healthy living and safety, but also being very realistic that they'll get in their hands no matter what. If they're not authorized to buy it, there are adults who will buy it and pass it along. And so just kind of that meld, how can we educate the population, and how can we at least safely administer it and figure it out? Because that may change over time, certainly for the years to come.
So
I
two
guess I
things
just
can.
don't. I was going to say, I guess I just don't know that I fully understand why it needs to be safely administered, right? If we already have approved menthol flavored vapes, which can help people, again, that harm reduction. I just think the at risk population of this is a vulnerable population, and while I agree that it would be, it's good to have some regulation, and maybe they'll pull the plug on something like this, but we again know that kids underage drink and underage smoke and underage pretty much everything, and so and none of those have been pulled, like the plug hasn't been pulled, and so because there's money to be made, and so I worry that once that train is moving, that diverting the train will take a lot of harm, and I think even a little harm to our younger kind of population is not great. That's my take.
I think two things can be true at the same time. Having more FDA authorized devices in the market to take the place of unauthorized, unregulated devices is a good thing. At the same time, having more options for people who are looking to quit smoking, and giving them more options is also a good thing. But at the same time, we have to keep an eye on the risks of people who are not supposed to be using it, ending up using it, and the risk of unrecognized harm has to be realized as well. And that's what really makes this topic truly fascinating. Thank you very much for joining us.